Hi, and welcome to Rick Fry in Real Time. We are brought to you by Oneness Ministries and the Stream Grace Network. I'm so excited to introduce my guest that I thought about this guy for a long time. And I told him last night, I said, finally I just got the courage to send him an email. And he's somebody you should know, Preston Gillham.
It's the only email I got that week, Rick.
Preston is an author.
Yeah.
He's a certified professional
Business coach.
Business coach.
Yeah.
And avid outdoorsman.
And stunningly handsome, smart,
Rugged,
debonair.
ruggedly handsome.
Yes, there we go. long as we're making stuff up.
Because that's what I go for. I go for ruggedly handsome.
Yeah.
We spent the day, I can't believe we spent the day,
Yep.
well, you did, fishing.
Yep. Lower Mountain Fork.
Lower Mount Fork here in Broken Bow, Oklahoma.
Yes.
How was it?
It was a ball. It was really a lot of fun. And I fished here before, but we had a guide today.
Yeah.
And
Cody
Thomas, and that was a huge help. Works out of Beaver's Bend Fly Shop, I think is what it's called.
Yes.
And it's either that or Broken Bow Fly Shop. Anyway.
I'm going to interrupt you.
All right.
Over there doing sound is Don Harrison. You can't see him on camera, but he's waving at us.
There we go.
He spent the day fishing as well.
If this doesn't go well, it's his fault.
He just gave us a timeout. Yeah. So, you spent the day on that river.
So we had a great guide,
Yep.
and so this is really an interesting river. I mean, it was originally the Mountain Fork,
mm-hmm.
and we're over in eastern Oklahoma, southeastern Oklahoma, deep
Yes.
southeastern Oklahoma.
Yes.
And my granddad, who lived about an hour and a half up the road or so in Poto, Oklahoma.
You told me that. My uncle was he was over all this, he was school district.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Superintendent of schools?
Yeah, superintendent of school. T.C. Bear was his name.
I'll be.
Yeah.
In Poto.
In Poto.
LaFleur County.
Yeah.
I'll be.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my granddad, he's dead, but he was born December 5th, 1900 in Poto, Indian Territory.
Wow.
So Oklahoma wasn't even a state yet. And Granddaddy fly fished all these creeks up and down eastern Oklahoma.
Now, what were the rods made of?
Bamboo.
They were bamboo.
Yeah, and I have I have a couple of his rods in my study at home, and a picture of him, as a matter of fact, on one of these little creeks that he would fish, the Fushmaline, or for all I know, the Mountain Fork.
Yeah.
And he's got a stringer of panfish and his fly rod and his hat with his flies in it and his cigarette, and he's been in a float tube.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but back, I think in the 50s, whoever's in charge of such things dammed up the Mountain Fork,
Yes.
created Broken Bow Lake, and then somebody decided a number of years ago, to see if they could get trout to live in the lower Mountain Fork, the river that's below the dam, because the water coming out of the bottom of the lake is cold.
Cold, yes.
And anyway, long story short, they were not just successful; they were wildly successful.
That's amazing.
It's amazing, and
it's the
so
only place in the state, isn't it, that has trout?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only trout water close.
Yeah.
And furthermore, then once they got the trout to live, then they came in and modified the river in places, and so they have created 12 miles of perfect river.
Wow.
So it's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And I'm an Okie, born and bred. I live in Fort Worth, Texas now, but I'm proud of my home state. They did a great job. And so yes, we had a lot of fun. We caught all rainbows, I think. Don, did you catch anything other than a rainbow? Yeah, there's some other stuff in there, but it was all rainbow trout today, and they were most of them were about this big.
We're getting time out again.
Yeah. And I got some stuff to tell you about this book I wrote too, Rick.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background, your education, and what you do, what you've done.
Yeah. So this is actually my home part of the state. I graduated high school in Durant, which is about an hour and a half west of here.
You said it wrong.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Durant. But anyway, graduated high school there, started college at Southeastern Oklahoma State, what is now University.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a junior in college, I transferred to what is now Missouri State University. At the time, it was Southwest Missouri State. And I got my undergrad degree there in antiquities, ancient history. And so I learned about the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Egyptians and the Israelites and so forth, and got about 100 years, or went into about 100 AD in the Roman Empire, and then we would stop and study, go back to something else. And then I decided I would pursue my master's in ancient history, and did that, and they wanted me to learn to read a couple of hieroglyphic languages, and I decided I didn't want to know that much about it. And meanwhile, my dad and I were dabbling in a partnership together where we were discipling people in the Christian faith. And so when I bailed out of the grad program in antiquities, I completely switched gears and went and did my grad work in counseling, guidance and counseling. And after I graduated from that, then Dad and I went into partnerships together. It's we kind of drifted into that a little bit, but it was roughly 1979, 1980, and we had a great run. And then in 1981, here again we kind of drifted into this, but in 1981 we had the opportunity to move to Fort Worth, Texas, and specialize our work to deal only with, to counsel only with Christian vocational workers. So ministers of music, pastors, seminary people, missionaries, and so forth. And
his dad was Dr. Bill Gillham, by the way.
Yeah. And then by then, Mom has joined the team, so we're a trio now, Annabelle. And then in the mid 80s, then Dad and I decided we were tired of counseling, and so we began to refer people away for most of that. And we wrote a couple of books. We decided we would do radio work, and so we did that. And of course, when that happened, then that called for a bunch of staff, and Dad didn't really have any interest in that, and I found that I liked that. And
really?
I liked
managing people.
I liked management.
Wow.
And so the folks and I didn't really realize it at the time, but when we kind of made this decision in the middle 80s that this is what we were going to do, they basically came to work for me. And that's a good idea on paper. But, I've told people before, if I could manage my mother, I could manage anyone. Dad was a whole lot easier, but Mom, she brought everything, all of her resources, all of her angles, she brought every one of them to work every day.
So, are you doing what you dreamed about doing as a young boy?
No, I'm not. I was going to be a cowboy. I was going to be Cheyenne Bodie. Yeah, that's who I was going to be when I was a kid. And I liked Cheyenne Bodie. I didn't really care for the Lone Ranger.
I like the song.
Yeah. And I liked Paladin.
Yeah, Paladin.
But I never really liked the Lone Ranger because when he would get in a fight, he could chase down a stagecoach and jump on somebody, and they would all tumble down the hill, but he never lost his hat. He never lost. But Cheyenne Bodie, man, I mean, he lost his hat. His hair was in his face. It was a great fight. And then he'd take his shirt off. And you want me to take my? I look like Cheyenne. No, I'll save that.
We'll save that for the next episode.
Save that for the next episode. And he always got this beautiful woman, and I'm thinking, hey.
That was Clint Walker.
Oh my, Rick. I believe that's correct.
Somebody will tell us at the time.
Yeah, I believe that's. So anyway, no, not really. But I discovered that I loved this, and just to fill that in a little bit, I had not any idea what I was doing, because I mean they don't teach you to manage anything when you're trying to learn what happened with Alexander the Great, you know.
No, they don't.
And so anyway, this friend, an older friend that I had known through church, was the chief of internal auditing for the Tandy Corporation, which is the parent company to Radio Shack and so forth. And he took early retirement, he and a buddy, and after a few months decided they didn't like being early retired. And so they decided they were going to go into business, and the buddy was going to be the front end of that, and my friend Carol was going to be the back end, and he's an accountant. And so he came to me and said, I need some office space. Would you sublet some space? And so I did, because I had space to lease. And he was now on the other side of the wall, and that guy took me under his wing. And he taught me accounting, he taught me business, he taught me bookkeeping, he taught me contracts, he taught me negotiation, he taught me personnel, he taught me legal stuff. And so he was my mentor, and he put me in touch then with another guy that I never met. I read him a lot, but he was a mentor, and that's Peter Drucker.
Huh.
And so we rocked and rolled in the radio world for a while. We were early adopters to the digital world, the world of the internet. And in fact, that to give you an idea of how quick we were on that wagon, our web address is lifetime.org. I mean, that's how early we were to the game.
Yeah.
And then before long, everything was digitized. And once that happened, we went from being kind of a nationwide ministry to an international ministry. And as that happened, again, it's a long story, and I won't bore everybody with it, but I began to work overseas a lot, especially in Eastern Europe, but I was in Central Asia and the Caribbean and, of course, Canada and so forth, and really enjoyed doing that kind of work. All along have written and taught.
That's my next question is, when did you discover you could write?
Yeah, probably in the middle 80s is when I discovered, well, I mean, I wrote a lot in history. You know, with that degree, I had to write all the time. Yeah. But those were academic papers, and I didn't really discover that I enjoyed writing until 1987 or so. And then in 2008, I transitioned the ministry to the next generation of folks, and I moved home to write 80% of the time.
And here's some of your...
Here they are. Shameless Commerce coming your way right now.
Was this the first one?
That's the first book that I wrote after I moved home. It wasn't my first book to write.
Okay.
I wrote several books while I was still running Lifetime Guarantee.
Okay.
But this is the first book that I wrote when I moved home, and this is a novel, and it is an adventure story. But underneath the adventure story is the battle between flesh and spirit that Galatians chapter 5 talks about.
Is this influenced by your study of antiquities?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then this is the second.
Yeah, my history studies, I learned far more about humanity and human dynamic, etc., studying history than I ever did studying counseling.
So these two, this is a set.
This is a sequel.
Yeah, the sequel.
The Battle for the Round Tower is a
And they
sequel.
get this on your website.
They can, wherever fine books are sold.
Okay.
There we go.
And then you wrote Swagger.
Yeah, this is, don't remember when this was published, maybe 2014-ish. No, 2020. And this is a book on life, thought, and belief. And it's a series of essays. And I wrote this for 7 young friends, all of whom I knew I needed to write to. Instead of writing to them individually, I wrote to them all at once. This is the result.
That's fun.
And I
Oh,
thought,
that's awesome.
okay, my target audience is, these 20 to 25-year-olds. But this book it's received a whole lot broader reading audience than I anticipated, which is great.
Yeah.
I love that. So anyway. And then the most recent
Is
this orange book,
Rigorous
Rigorous Grace.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
this is
what we're going to talk about today.
yeah,
Okay.
on the spiritual practices.
Yep. So I read this book. I haven't read these, but I've read this book. And I am, can we set that over there?
Yeah, sure.
I am, in the book, you talk about how you have been criticized because people interpret these disciplines as legalism.
Right.
Or, and I read Richard Foster's book, gosh, 20 years ago, maybe longer. And I applied it to my life. Now, my motivation was to make God happy with me.
Sure.
And of course, we know that doesn't work. And so you fast because you want something, or you
Right.
yeah. So what is the criticism for? Because I think these things are vital for understanding the depth of our relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're not only vital; they're essential.
Okay.
And I think the pushback on this, the accusation that this is legalism, is because when you introduce the topic of a discipline or of a practice or something like this, then implicit within that idea is evaluation and assessment and failure and course correction and those sorts of things. And so people mistakenly believe that if you evaluate your performance, that means that you are bringing or introducing legalism into your spiritual life.
Yeah.
And that's simply a bad definition of legalism.
Right.
So the idea behind legalism is that there are a list of rules, and not just these disciplines that are in this book. I mean, there's a long list.
Right.
But that these rules that are applied to the Christian life, if you keep them, they'll do what you said just a minute ago.
Yeah.
They will earn you acceptance with God, or
Right.
they'll earn you favor with God, or they will get you back into God's good graces if you feel like you have fallen from God's good graces, and so forth. That is legalism.
Yeah.
And the reason it's legalism, the reason that's a problem, is because the presupposition is I can do something either that the work of Christ did not do, or that if I behave in this way, I can improve upon the work of Christ. And now we're running into the problem that Paul wrote about in Galatians.
Right.
And Galatians is a short book, but it is the angriest book in the Bible because the whole idea is that the people that were at the church in this place, Galatia, they had adopted the idea that if they did these things, then they could enhance the finished work of Christ. And of course, it's not the finished work of Christ if it can be improved upon, right?
Yeah.
And Paul doesn't just say, "Hey, you're misguided here." He's so angry. He says, "This is actually not even the gospel. This isn't a derivation of the gospel. It's a completely different idea."
Yeah.
And he really goes off for 6 chapters there.
I can't think of any place in the Bible where somebody said, "You foolish people."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he does there,
Yeah.
and he says some other stuff.
Yeah.
So that's legalism, but performance and evaluation of performance and assessment of your performance and guidelines for how you perform and what you should perform and so on, that's all over the Bible. So what you do as a believer is very important to God. It just doesn't do for you what Jesus did for you. It does something else for you.
Exactly. And as I started this book, I was afraid that it was going to be
Yeah.
legalistic, and I was going to have to be told you need to change your habits. You need
Sure.
to, and I may need to change my habits anyway. But that's not what you did.
Good.
Yeah, that's not what you did. You said these things, most of them we do already.
Mm-hmm.
All of us talk to God.
Mm-hmm.
All of us have dialogue with God.
Yeah.
All of us enjoy solitude.
Mm-hmm.
All of us spend time getting informed through what the authors of the Bible wrote,
Sure. Right.
because that's our foundation for understanding who God is.
Yeah.
We need to study it.
Yep. And while we do those things, though, Rick, it's important to understand that because these are essential practices, they must be part of our regular life.
Mm-hmm.
So, like any practice, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so the more you read Scripture, which is one of the spiritual practices, the better you're going to get at being able to digest what Scripture is saying, and to, as the Bible would say, to properly handle the word of truth. And the more that you practice the discipline of prayer, the more comfortable you're going to become with that.
Yeah.
Now, so let's talk about that just for a minute, for example. So think about somebody that's an acquaintance of yours, not a friend per se, but an acquaintance, and somebody says, so you and Joe, you're going to have to take a 5-hour road trip together somewhere. And so you and Joe get in the car, and there's probably apprehension on both of your parts as you figure out how to talk to one another. On the other hand, if somebody says, hey, you and your wife, or your husband, we need to take a 5-hour road trip to wherever, there's no apprehension about being in the car and having discussion with your spouse for 5 hours, because you've practiced that. That is exactly what prayer is. And so when we first begin to pray, it's awkward, etc. But as it becomes a practice, then our communication with our Heavenly Father becomes something that just flows for us. And that's the point.